Isn't.
Sarah Boyce is just joining and the recording is in progress, Mary.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for May 10th. A reminder to Nantucket residents to go vote if you're watching. And this open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full names for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
And I don't see Joanna Roach, but she may join us later. We'll try and note that if she does. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And we do not have any anticipated speakers today. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute yourself on your phone or computer when you're not speaking. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. And for items with public comment after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So we have, as our first item on the agenda, a draft of the quarterly report to the Select Board. Vince and I worked on that. It was included in the packet for this meeting. So Vince, I guess if you want to put that up on the screen, and if there are any comments from members about the content of the report, things that we would want to make sure that the Select Board is aware of. And Vince, you may need to correct me, but the perspective from this report includes the Coastal Resilience Plan and the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, but not so much the Natural Resources Department's activities that might be outside of our committee, although those certainly do creep in because we get a lot of input from the Natural Resources Department. So Vince went through our meeting agendas for the first quarter, and it looks like Joanna Roach is joining us shortly here. And we pulled out some of the highlights. These are, again, things that we would want to make sure the Select Board is aware of, but we don't need to tell them what they already know. So we're not reporting on all of our activities, as they're certainly aware of some of those already. For instance, we would celebrate the adoption of the Coastal Resilience Plan, but they're well aware that that happened. So we have a couple of highlights from meetings, some of our activities, and specifically about the Coastal Resilience Plan, what has been going on with those recommendations. Vince, do you want to scroll down? We'll just get a quick overview of the entire thing. The grant applications that we're working on, or that Vince is working on. And then we also have the opportunity to make any request or ask any question of the Select Board if there are some that we would want to pursue with them. And I anticipate that Vince and I will present this report to the Select Board. So we'll have a little bit of an opportunity for dialogue if they are interested in doing that. Vince, anything you want to add to that description?
You covered it. I got it.
So any comments or questions from committee members about the content of the report? Addition, subtraction, edits, that's all welcome. Sarah, and then Ian.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, because this is for the select board, I know that they're just highlights, but there's two things that I thought might deserve just one little bit more sentence of explanation. So I'm gonna just double check where it is on I'm sorry. So under the coastal resilience plan activities, the first line item, which is where we decided to work on the downtown neighborhood flood barrier as a priority project for grant funding. I feel like we should have some just small qualification of why that was chosen for funding. And if I remember correctly from the discussion, part of it was, this is such a complicated issue that this is something that would be helpful to have Arcadis's assistance. I guess the argument for doing that is so that's not misconstrued as we recognize as this is the most highest priority project to be taken care of immediately. Because obviously there's lots of ongoing things, right? So does that make sense? Or do you hear, or I know you and Vince worked on it, so maybe you've already talked about what to include and what not to include.
No, I think, Sarah, that makes perfect sense. And Vince, if we want to go back and look at that discussion and add some of the why to that, just as I'm looking at it now, we'd also want to mention it's a feasibility study, not the actual construction or engineering. So that clarification is something we could add there too. And that's more for the public who would be seeing this report in its presentation.
I guess, yes, Mary, exactly what I was thinking was reading that without any subcontext or knowledge of what the discussion was, there might be questions. And if I may, I have one more similar suggestion. A little further down where it's the locally adopted sea level rise scenario and best available flood hazard data. So I know there was a presentation about the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model, and the decision was not to use that. So I would be a little concerned that this was coming out as we're recommending using the localized model.
So Sarah, I watched the February 8th meeting last night. There was no decision.
Okay.
So there was discussion, and that's what this says, but definitely not a decision.
Okay. So that's what I just wanted to make sure that that also came out of that it wasn't construed as we're using this now. But maybe I just read it wrong.
I think the language here says the subject of upcoming meetings and is an ongoing conversation. I think that is accurate and gives the right impression. But thank you for questioning that. It's always a good thing to make sure we remember correctly.
Thank you.
Ian, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Mary. So if you go back to the second paragraph at the top, highlights from the quarter, I feel when it says the design thinking workshop on March 7th and 8th was wildly successful, that's a little too journalistic for me. I think well attended, as sort of more, committee speak in some ways. And if I don't know, there were nearly 40 people, maybe, if one wants to be specific, but I think well attended and a number of productive ideas were developed, sums it up pretty accurately.
Okay, comments on that, Peter?
With respect to Ian's comment, I was there. I think you were there, weren't you, Ian?
Yes, I was, and it was very interesting, but wildly successful is just,
I have a different view. I say it was wildly successful. Everybody was energized and excited, and to just say, it was well attended, it doesn't really convey what went on. I mean, maybe we don't have to use wildly successful, but we have to let people know that everybody that was there participated. A lot of great ideas came out of it, and well attended. I mean, some of the worst meetings I've ever been to are well attended. People were there, but nothing happened.
Yes, Peter, but the bottom line is that then the next phrase, a number of productive ideas were developed, implies that it was successful. It was successful because it was productive.
If I
So,
can sort of marry the two concepts, I think that we can replace wildly successful with well attended by enthusiastic, or Peter, I'm forgetting the exact words you used, but describe the participation, which is how we're defining wildly successful, but be more specific about it, because I take Ian's point. Wildly successful is it's not really communicating any information. We don't. So Sarah has her hand up as well. Sarah, did you want to comment on this or another item?
Yes, thank you, Mary. I did want to comment on this. I didn't want to say anything because I was not in attendance at the meeting. But if our metric is attendance, then I do take issue with that, because I was specifically not invited to attend the meeting, as was Gary. And I haven't spoken publicly in our meeting about that, but I think that does a disservice to the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee by not having all members allowed to go. So I think that I was told why and blah blah blah, and that's fine. But I think if we're going to talk about it being wildly successful, I think that it should have had then, or if the metric is attendance, then it should have been open to the public. Many people were not allowed to go, and so I think saying that it was productive and that nice things came out of it is a better metric than saying successful or using the metric of attendance, because it was really a limited invitation only meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. Would it be helpful to, instead of saying well attended, to say attendees represented a number of town departments and committees, or attended by a wide cross-section of town government institutions, something again more specific that indicates the value of the attendance of the people that were there, because I take your point about everyone's point about well attended isn't really a metric that's helpful, and it misrepresents it slightly. Okay, so let's go to Jen and then Ian and then Joanna. I do see your hand up as well.
Thank you, Mary. I actually really like what you just said. I kind of took a bit of an issue with the wildly successful, because I think that is relative, and I didn't necessarily see it that way, but I really think that from the perspective of attendance of town government and all of the committees, I don't think I've participated in something that was quite that broadly reaching. So I think that was a positive of the event. So I really like putting that in. I think if we're going to talk about the number of productive ideas and et cetera, a point that might go in here is, and maybe to prove the effectiveness of it, because that's really what we're getting at, is how effective was this design thinking workshop, is what are some of those ideas and are they stepping forward? Does it make sense to list a few of the things that came out of it and where they are? Just my perspective is the effectiveness of this as a participant, as I haven't seen any next steps yet. So it would just be interesting to know that this is going forward, or that there is a plan for implementation of the ideas, because I thought it was interesting discussions, but I didn't actually necessarily see anything going anywhere at the end of 2 days. That's just my
So I appreciate that, and I'll give you my perspective when I read this paragraph, and that is that first, again, we didn't need to tell the select board what they already knew, and they've had a presentation from the design thinking workshop. And the link provides the information. So I didn't want to characterize our entire quarter with a large section on this one event, which, as Sarah noted, was not technically a Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee event. So my thought was having the link and a brief mention was sufficient in this context. Certainly open to others' opinions on that. That was just my thinking and how this came to you. Jen, did I cut you off? Did you have anything else? Or
you didn't cut me off at all, Mary. Thank you. Could I just add one slight clarification to what you just said, or an addition? Thank you. I would just say, I agree you're presenting to the select board, but it's also then a public meeting that we have the addition to get public buy-in to things or public information out there, and that the potential for people to actually click on a link is probably slim. And I didn't know if there were one or two bullet pointed outcomes that would say, hey, this is really interesting, and CRAC might be taking this up throughout the next year. That would be my only
Okay, can we get
suggestion, if anything like that made sense.
can we get a sense from the other committee members? Do we want to expand this to include more information about the outcomes? Ian, go ahead.
Well, up to a point, I do think I think it would be helpful to expand it. I certainly take Sarah and Jennifer's point. The wording, for instance, with Vice Chair Peter Brace representing CRAC, I would prefer something that then went on. 7 other CRAC members representing their specific committees attended the design workshop as well. And then if you want to list also in attendance were so many town departments, I think would flesh that particular part out. And I take Sarah's point, because I think it was very unfortunate that there weren't, that they decided to limit it to, I think, what was it, 38? I can't remember exactly, but that's why they did, you know.
Would it be helpful if we footnoted the list of participating town departments and committees rather than calling out any one individual?
I think that would be a great idea.
Any other thoughts on that, including as a footnote, the list of participating organizations? Peter, I'm not hearing anything. I'm sorry if you're trying to speak. You're
Yeah,
not.
I just wanted to say that, you know, I had the same feeling why wasn't the whole committee there, but, you know, I wanted to say for my part, I was there because Mary couldn't go. And so I was asked to go and I went. So for whatever that's worth, I did feel that all of CRAC had to be there. But then the other thought that I had was that, you know, I'm sure the town had a budget for how many people could be there. And they most certainly wanted people there who weren't involved in the creation of the plan, who would bring their unique perspective, their department, their organization. So at least for the people who didn't get to go, you know that you were bumped for a very good reason, not just, it wasn't personal, it wasn't, you know, anyway.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks for sugarcoating that, Peter.
Well, yeah, whatever. I saw Vince nodding his head. Yes, there was a budget. Yes, a certain number of people could be there. So
I think Arcadis paid for it, right? And I assume they gave a ceiling. So
They did. If I could jump in, Mary, sorry.
Go ahead. I need to regain control of the conversation.
Thank you, Mary. Very briefly, there was 2 limits. Arcadis set the limit at 40 for a very simple reason, because then once you broke it ever into groups, you needed so many facilitators. 3 per group was the way that it worked out. And if you wanted to add more people and have more facilitators, it was going to cost more money from Arcadis. Arcadis did this event for free. It was, they paid for it. This didn't cost the town anything other than the cost of the booking the Nantucket Hotel. And that was the second limiting factor, the cost to the town for booking the venue and the providing everything for everyone for 2 days.
Thank you, Vince. Joanna, you had your hand up. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I support a lot of what's been said so far. I think it's interesting. I think 2 things. If was Sarah the only person in our group who didn't get to go? There were a couple of others.
Yeah, not every member of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee was there, but
right.
many were.
Right.
Officially, Peter was the only representative from the committee.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, certainly I was there because of the finance committee, right? That they asked me if I would go. But I do think that
I'm going to be here in 20 minutes.
Some of that could have been a little bit more transparent, right? And that maybe would eliminate some confusion, I think, now. But I guess here's the other thing that I really want to say about this is I don't have any idea what ideas are going to be implemented or have kind of risen to the top out of this experience. And so it would be good to ask, I think, for feedback from the select board of, of all the ideas that are generated, are there 5 that are moving forward? I don't want to say that nothing, yes, I see Vince, like I know that there's some grant stuff that's been happening and there are some activities, but it would be good to hear back, like how did they prioritize this after the meeting and what are the action steps?
Okay, so Liz, can you scroll down to the bottom of the report? So one potential ask from the select board is a follow-up to the design thinking workshop. And I don't know exactly what form that would take at this time. But again, I want to remind people that we don't need to tell the select board what they already know.
Right.
And Vince gave a presentation along with Arcadis about the design thinking workshop, the priorities, ideas that came out of it. That's available in the select board's recordings. And this event, again, was not an official Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee meeting. It's certainly significant. We definitely want to mention it, but I don't want that event to take over the entire report that we're giving to the select board. It's not the purpose of the report.
Right. I get that.
Yeah.
But I think I would just reiterate that one of the things that Jen said, which is it was the first time that I'd seen that many volunteers, town employees, thought leaders, if you will, on this issue in one room having a conversation, right? And that was significant.
Yes, I would agree. And I think that I want to move the discussion on after Matt has a chance to comment, because we've got plenty to talk about. And again, I don't want this one event to take over the report, but I think Vince and I have enough feedback that we can rework this paragraph at a minimum, and then add the footnote with the list of attendees. I think that will be valuable as well. Matt, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think the goal, my sense is the goal of it was to bring together staff, and it was successful. If the staff isn't on board and isn't talking to each other and doing this, none of this stuff will happen. So I think that it wasn't to exclude people. I think it was to kind of coalesce around what are we going to do first. So I think, and it was public. If any of the public wanted to come, we had members of the public sit and watch parts of it. So I don't want the people to get the misconception that it wasn't a public meeting. It was a public meeting. Maybe, it reminds me a little bit, the widely successful. It sounds like people are mad they didn't get invited to the beach party, like the wild party, and we missed it, and I didn't get an invite. I don't think it wasn't a wild beach party, and you didn't miss anything. But I think what came out of it for the 3 sort of projects that seemed to rise up on the very last day, or on the wrap up, was fixing the issue at Sacagawea, Matticat and Ames, and Washington Street. Those seem to be the 3 short term that staff were going to be working on, along with everything else that Vince is working on constantly. So I think there was, some of the things that did come out of it. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so I think, what I want to do here is, I think it is wise to have some kind of a follow-up meeting, whether it's internally with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, whether, whatever form it might take, I don't know. But I think that's definitely a goal that we will set for the committee, speaking as the chair. But I need to move on and not dwell on this one item. We have the entire rest of the report. I'd love to get any feedback on that. Gary? Gary, you're on mute. Gary, you're muted.
As one of the excludees, I have some comments, but basically, I think it was a team building exercise, and I think those.
Gary, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're moved on from the design thinking workshop. We're not talking about that anymore.
You're going to exclude me from this conversation as well.
I apologize, Gary.
Okay. Well, my other comment is that I think these quarterly reports are an excellent idea, because one of the thoughts that I had early on was that I'd love that to make it a practice that at least once a quarter, the select board has to think about what's going on with our coastal resiliency operations and activities. And by sending this report every quarter, that's an opportunity for us to let them know what's going on, and also an opportunity for us to say, with respect to some of the issues in this quarter's report, we could use the following assistance from the select board on these items. So that's what my thought.
Thank you, Gary. Matt?
Yeah, I think Gary's 100% right, and that getting it in front of us quarterly. Also, don't assume that the select board is spending a lot of time on this. The select board is not spending a lot of time. We're counting on this committee, and and Vince spending a lot of time on this. So sort of when we're writing these, or when we're thinking about it or presenting it, just assume that we aren't putting the time in on this, because there's so many other things that are going on. Just as a
Yeah, I agree. And with Gary and Matt both, I think this is going to be a very valuable tool for us to keep the topic of coastal resilience in the forefront of the select board's minds and in a conversation with them. Other thoughts about what we might ask the select board to do, or ask from the select board, because that is one of the things that is a feature of this report. Or any other feedback on the other items that are in the report. Peter?
I hear what Matt's saying about how the select board is not going to be working on this all the time. Now, of course, they have the town to run, but I think maybe that they, as they have ideas, things that come up, that they should let us know. If things come up at meetings that are related to this, I don't know how to get us that information, but you never know what thing is going to be talked about that has to do with coastal resilience that we should hear about. And not everybody is going to be attending a meeting unless they have to. So I don't know.
It's speaking from the likelihood of the select board working for us. I think it's our responsibility to stay up to date on the agendas and the topics at their meetings.
Right.
We're an advisory committee to them. So
I hear what you're saying with respect, but what I'm saying is that it may not be something that's on the agenda that happens in a meeting, and they have public comment where people are invited to make a comment on something that's not on the agenda, and information could happen that we need to hear at that meeting that's not on the agenda, that we're not going to know about unless they say, hey, this issue came up. I'm just saying, maybe Matt could pass that on to all the select board members and say, here's a heads up. I don't know.
So Peter, you just gave me an idea. One thing we might do is extend an invitation to an individual select board member to attend any particular meeting and have a conversation with that person about coastal resilience topics. What do they see, coming from the public? So thank you, Peter. That might be a great idea. Vince, and I'll also point out that Vince is our connection to town administration and can bring things to us through that channel. But Vince, go ahead.
No worries. I just don't want to cause headaches for Matt or the select board. We just have to be careful when we're inviting other select board members to be careful with the numbers and attendance because of quorum issues for the select board. There's no harm to have a posted meeting if needs be to get around it, but I just don't want to cause an issue for that board or have an open meeting, no complaint. Minor problem.
That's why I was thinking about individual invites, not a joint meeting. Thank you, Vince. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. I wonder if a request, because I'm liking what I'm hearing Peter say, I'm just not necessarily sure of the best way to get it done, but I wonder if a request in these quarterly reports could the select board provide one or two things that they see coming up in the next 3 months that they would want feedback or an opinion or information from the coastal resilience from us on, because I agree that we're advisory to them, but sometimes we don't connect up to what we need to be advising them on. So, you know, an active piece from the select board could potentially be, we see these two things coming up in the next 3 to 6 months. Is there any information that the CRAC committee could provide? Something like that.
Thank you, Jen. Other comments or questions? So I do have some suggestions for this part of the report, so I want to make sure we get everybody else's input before I go ahead with mine. All right, so one of my thoughts was that we could request that the select board expand the environmental area of their strategic plan to reference the 40 recommendations from the coastal resilience plan, or more, you know, coastal resiliency just as a topic. The last time I looked at the strategic plan, the environmental section was sort of thin on detail. So I would definitely put that in as a suggestion to the select board. Thoughts on that? Matt?
It's a good idea.
Thank you. Jen?
Thanks, Mary. I always think it's a good idea to expand on environmental strategic actions. I just wonder if there's specific pieces, and I myself would have to go back and go through the strategic plan again, but I just don't know if we want to be more directive to that, or maybe that's something we could think about in a future report.
Other potential questions would be anything that's come out of town meeting that has a coastal resilience focus, requesting a timeline or an explanation of how those might be implemented. That's another potential ask from the select board. So for instance, the hiring of the new public outreach person that would be shared by Natural Resources and the Board of Health. Is there a timeline for that? What's the process for that? That's definitely something that we'd be interested in as we work on public education, would be the ability to make use of that position. Jen?
Yeah, Mary, I would add in the planning for the new harbor master building, because that was in the appropriations and just voted on today. And part of the reasoning in it was planning for coastal resiliency. And I know we probably, just if there's a point for us to provide input as the design process goes forward.
I'm not sure about that, Vince. Maybe we can put on a future agenda to just take a look at where that is. My understanding was it's already designed. It's just going to cost more to build. I could be wrong on that. Vince?
I've also already provided input on that building. I know it came up in 1 or 2 committee meetings in the past, and they're adamant that they remain in the same location. So we've put in some structural differences to help increase the longevity of the building. Effectively, for want of a better description, it's like the bottom of the building up to like the bottom of the windowsills will be like a concrete boat to stop flooding, as well as some structural differences.
Thank you, Vince. It's something we might take a look at in more depth as that moves forward. Matt?
Yeah, I've made comments too. Unfortunately, sometimes these things end up with a life of their own, you know, and people are committed to something. They're committed to what they've already worked on, even if there's a better way to do it. One thing that I thought of, and we were asked, you know, select board, you know, I'm running again right now. We were asked what our priorities are and how would you prioritize? And you guys probably read it. And one of my things was that we would be working with this group and others to prioritize. It wasn't just a select board function, and that this group is doing a pretty good job. And I think we are. So the other requests, one of the things that I think we could ask or do is we could put everything that goes to town meeting through a coastal resiliency filter. You know, I've sort of said the same thing about housing. I think we missed opportunities in the housing realm this town meeting because we were giving stuff, giving, development opportunity, but not asking that it be year round or, and sort of not putting it through a housing filter. It might be that CRAC should be looking at in the future, maybe CRAC should be looking at all the different articles and making recommendations. So if we are doing things that are sort of making the situation worse, we should be commenting on it and advising people not to do it, so, or to do it differently or to improve it somehow. It was just, that's one thought I had.
That's a big thought, Matt. I will say that Vince and I, each year for the last couple of years, have taken a look at the articles for town meeting. And, between the two of us discussed whether or not any of them should have a Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee discussion. We haven't, in our opinion, found anything that was, high ranking on that. I think we did the first year that we were a committee have that discussion on some of the articles. But things have been, not ambiguous. They've either been clearly in favor of coastal resilience and not really questioned, or not very applicable. That's been our opinion. But it's a very interesting concept. Should we be more official in offering opinions on the town meeting articles, and should we be more actively reviewing them? Certainly open to that as an option. Joanna.
I 100% agree, and I'm going to make a further suggestion because I have brought this up multiple times, both with the Finance Committee and also with the Capcom. And I think that maybe what we should do as a group is take the lead, right? Because what doesn't exist is what I've been asking for is a filter through what we can through which we can look at financial decisions that highlight, even if it was 5 things, like we made it super simple, that have an impact on coastal resiliency and decision making. But it would seem to me that the leadership here could be to develop what those 5 things are and to share them with the other committees instead of waiting for their feedback. So, for example, let's just take the Harbor Masters building. And I'm making this up, right? I'm completely making this up. Maybe one of the criteria is, what is the longevity of the building that they're proposing? What kind of tweaks would the building need to have in order to make it last longer? Like, what are the impacts of this particular building in this location and the money that we're investing, right? So if there were 5 things that we could create as filters, that would be helpful. And I know this would be helpful to the Finance Committee as we're evaluating both articles and budgets. Right? Like, I can give you another really good example, what's happening at the dump, right? There's $3 million in capital that's investing into the landfill. And there was conversation on this in terms of coastal resiliency, right? So, but I think having a criteria that we could report back on would be super helpful.
So I'm not at all disagreeing with you, but I want to point out that we do have our recommendation on sea level rise, which kind of points exactly at what you're saying, Joanna. It is not detailed as in 5 bullet points of things to consider, but it does definitely point the departments in that direction. And so we are talking about that later, so we may need to circle back to that idea.
Great.
I just wanted to make sure that we were all aware that we do have a platform in that regard.
Yeah.
Ian, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Mary. So Joanna's brought up a point specifically about the new Harbor Master building that came up tangentially before CONCOM when it was presented. And basically, it was outside our purview, but they were all questions that we wanted to ask. And I would think that having a crack representative asking these sort of questions when it goes for the HDC would be a big help for the town and for the project going forward. So, this is always, I think, a conversation an ongoing conversation, to what extent different town branches and committees liaise with each other. And again, the general consensus is not enough. And yet, we don't seem to have much progress going forward to have these sort of conversations.
So thank you, Ian. I will remind everybody to be careful what you wish for. If we want to have a role in these conversations, that means somebody has to show up and take that role. And I'll also remind us that we all have that opportunity today as individuals to speak at any public meeting And it's up to us to take advantage of that opportunity. So formalizing that in a more defined role is certainly an interesting idea. We just have to be prepared to execute if that's what we're asking for. Vince.
Super simple. I want to make sure I caught Ian's point right. Are you adding to this point here, Ian, or are you adding in another point? I have Crack to take the lead, have a just do it list. I won't get into this right now, but we do. And Crack to take the lead and the examples of Harbour Masters building. Did I catch your point right? Because this is Joanna's one.
Yes,
Okay.
I was just reinforcing what she had to say, that, you know,
No,
it had
okay.
come up.
I don't mean to, yeah, thanks. I didn't want to miss anything.
No.
Okay. Let's see. The other thing that I noticed in the coastal resilience plan is that there are a couple of recommendations where either town administration or the select board or the coastal resilience advisory committee are given a primary role. And so that's another area where we could look for follow-up as to how those recommendations will be pursued, given that the primary role belongs to somewhere between the town administration, select board, and Crack. So any further thoughts or comments on the content of this report? Are people happy with what's included? Is there anything else we want to add? Anything further on requests? So this is a draft. Vince and I will go through and rework it. If there's no other comment, does the committee want this to come back in its next iteration for approval? Or do you want us to create it and run with it? Just looking for the committee's direction. Joanna and then Ian.
Might not. Yes. I mean, I think we should take a look at it again, personally.
Okay. Ian?
I agree with Joanna. And, you know, circling around to your earlier point, Mary, the thing is, you know, members of the public are certainly entitled to lift their, you know, hands and contribute. But I don't think they're given the same amount of weight as someone formally representing a committee. So it's
Agreed. Yeah. Joanna?
You know, as a person who does go to some of these meetings and shows up, because I'm on this committee and on the finance committee, I do feel like I am heard and taken seriously. And so I think that one of the responsibilities of being in a group like this is to advocate for the interests of what you're participating in. And so I think everyone in this meeting has that opportunity to do that as they sort of see fit in terms of what they can show up for and lend their voice to. And I think that's part of one, I think the passion for doing this work, right? Like volunteering for your town, but also the passion for protecting the natural resources of Nantucket, which is basically why we're all here, right? I mean, I respect this about each and every one of you greatly, but we have to speak up.
Thank you, Joanna. Ian?
So again, I'm agreeing with Joanna, except when I show up, I'm careful to point out that I'm appearing in a private capacity if I'm not, you know, if I don't have prior permission to talk on behalf of the committee. So
Thank you, Ian. All right, so we will take this back for another draft to bring back to the committee. Vince, do we think we can have this back at the next meeting?
Yes, I have no issue with that.
That'll be the plan.
Okay, just want to just point out something super minor. By that stage at the next meeting, we'll have been working on it 2 months and we'll be starting to
Yeah, we got to wrap
draft. We can draft the second quarter and have something by the first week of July as well. I just want to make sure that everyone understands this is kind of a template that we want to move forward with, so that hopefully reporting won't take 2 months in the future. It might be much faster and much more swift.
Yeah, this is a very busy time. I have no problem with the fact that it took us 2 months to get to this with everything else going on. Okay, so moving on to the next item of the agenda, the discussion of the update from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. and from NOAA, the reports that were released in the last couple of months. So if you remember, we met February 8th. That was before NOAA had released their new information. We were discussing the recommendation to the select board, and Vince gave a presentation on MCFRM versus the existing NOAA. So we now have the update from NOAA, and then we also have the reports from the IPCC. Vince,
Okay.
take it away. Yeah.
Thank you. So I've got a short 13-slide presentation. I was working on this last Friday, yesterday, and this morning, because last minute person as usual. And there's a lot to go through in this. All right. So there's two reports, and put this in presentation mode. Come on. Everyone got this on screen?
Yep.
Okay. All righty. So two reports. I'm just going to call them the NOAA report, which is the Global and Regional Sea Level Rise Scenarios for the United States. It's far more than NOAA. There's a great number of organizations that were involved in this, from NASA, universities, FEMA, US Army Corps of Engineers. It was well represented. And then the other report, I'm just going to call the Ipcc report for short. And this is the 2022 Climate Change Impact Adaptation and Vulnerability Study. And this report I'm going to deal with first, if nobody minds. And I'm going to deal with this in a brief format. Try and keep this one simple. I have to say, for the committee, the real interest is in the NOAA report. Okay, so the IPCC report came out on February 27th. Both of these reports actually came out in February. They came out days apart. I'm famous for not sugarcoating things, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I hated this report. I'm sorry. It was very large, unwieldy. It was presented in what, like 18 chapters, 3,700 pages almost. There were 7 cross-chapter papers. They were tremendously interesting in their own right, but there was a couple of issues. I could only really focus on 5 sections. The one for the summary for the policymakers, the technical summary, the key points of departure that this was about, where things are going with sea level rise, then the ocean and coastal ecosystems and their services, and then there was the chapter North America, then the other continental groupings like Europe, South America, Africa, and so on. They obviously weren't something that I needed to review for this meeting here today. I have to say, this document was a terrific example of too long, didn't read. There was just so much. There was another thing that bugged me about going through it. There was a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda type statements, which are terrific, but it seems like it was mainly focused at national government level, still extremely useful, and still the tons of things to take away from it for town governments and local governments and committees, etc. But you know, we weren't the main audience, I suppose, is the politest way I could put it. It did focus mostly on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. There was one slide or one image that I could take from it. It's this one. And this is about where we're going with our greenhouse gas emissions and how we've likely missed the opportunity for a good result out of greenhouse gas emissions, and where things are going and the various scenarios, and how we're probably kind of mid to low is the point. It kind of uses 2030 as kind of this cliff moment, whereby if we don't start really getting things in order and have good things basically well underway or already, you know, turned around by 2030, we're in worse trouble than we are already in. So this one graphic basically sums it up about as well as you can. And it does have a long time frame to it. Does go to 2100, but I'm sorry, I tried very hard to dig into this report, and it took a lot of time. And this is about as good as I could have done with this, unless I had an awful lot more time. But so I'm just going to pause there for a second. Did any committee members review any sections of this, or anyone have any better thoughts on this one, having gone through it? The IPCC.
Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Mary. I mean, I agree, Vince, it is a huge document. What I found really useful is that if you go to the website, they do have a lot of like informational pieces they pulled out to make it more accessible. So there are like fact sheets, that really, highlight the data and information that's in an easier way to understand, and then the infographics and stuff like that make it a little bit easier to consume, I would say, if we're putting it out there for other people to look at. I think it's got a lot of amazing information in it. It's just pulling it out, and I would suggest the fact sheets as an easier way to access the data than the full thing. Does it provide stuff we don't really kind of already, I don't know that it necessarily impacts how we're going to address what we're doing today. It just reinforces the data we've kind of already been using, I would say.
Exactly. The other thing that it does, I think that would be extremely useful to us in a tangential way, is for one of the next projects that's going to come up for the greenhouse, for the climate action plan that Lawrence Sinatra is trying to get off the ground. So the policies in that will be far more applicable at that state, at that level, with that plan. For the CRP and for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, as we stand today, I was having trouble picking out stuff that were relevant to the committee, to be honest. But yeah, the fact sheets, I did pick through them, and there was tons of stuff in that too. And trying to find the sea level rise stuff in that alone, man, that took time, and I didn't really. Okay.
Quick question. So Jen, when you say go to their website, is that the same as the link that we provided in the agenda? Okay, you're nodding yes. Okay, thank you. Vince, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so here's the fun one. The NOAA report. I know there's so many organizations involved, but it just makes it a nicer way to say it. And we've already been using the NOAA information in the past. And that 2017 report by Sweet et al. Was effectively the same thing. This is an update of that 2017 report. So there's kind of 4 key messages, and I paraphrased the key messages to make them look nicer on screen and cut down on huge long sections. This basically increases confidence regardless of the emission pathway we're on, and it narrows the range of projected goals, national and global, national and regional sea level rise out to 2050. 2050 was one of the key focuses of this report. It was kind of, I think midterm is the correct term to use there, focus more than anything. Now, it did do other things as well, including 2100, and for the first time, 2150, if I say that in a way that's not grating. So, and then by 2050, the expected relative sea level rise will cause tide and storm surge heights to increase and will lead to a shift in US coastal flood regimes. And then with major and moderate high tide flood events occurring and frequency at moderate to high flood tides events occur today. So here's the interesting bit. I've got graphs on this one. This is the other big thing that came out of this report. It's not just sea level rise, it's daily flood levels and how much flooding we might see, and the kind of minor, moderate, and major flood levels, and it actually puts numbers to those. So it then talks about the global temperatures increasing and what that might do for sea level rise, and it did have pretty much everything in meters, and where possible, I converted everything from meters to feet for everyone's benefit. So, and then it talks about a lot of the things that were in the Ipcc report about monitoring the ongoing sea level rise change and the sources of it, and trying to figure out where the divergent scenarios are. And then they got onto the topic of bounding. Bounding is something that it took me a while to get my head around, and hopefully people here will see that in the next few sections. Alrighty. So I tried to just focus on the Northeast because this was a national level document. So in global terms, we can see in this graph here on the left what sea level rise is doing. Then the contiguous United States, and what it says about that, it's not quite contiguous. It's basically including a lot of islands as well and island groupings. And then I just focused in on the Northeast. And the big takeaway from these is we need to understand, we've seen this before, the first part of the graph is the history part, what's happened, but it also includes up to 2020 now. That's important. And we can see what we've already known for the Northeast, that we've had a pretty interesting and steep increase in sea level rise since the 1970s. But it also then goes into the projections. And in terms of the projections, sea level rise in the Northeast is still ahead of the global average. We've got more sea level rise here than globally. And then when it talks about, and it's all, excuse me, I'll start again. It is within the approximate range of the contiguous United States, as you might expect. So, and then when we're talking about the contiguous United States, there's actually 8 regions Northeast, Southeast, Gulf Coast regions, the Western regions, and then the Hawaiian Islands and Caribbean islands. So they have their own issues as well, but lumping that into the contiguous when it's not necessarily contiguous, I'm just using their phrasing, but that's the way that they ran their numbers. Okay, so here's where things get interesting. For the Northeast, I've tried to understand more closely what scenario we're in. And here's where we end up with an interesting concept. This is the thing about bounding. So once we look at where we are for various sea level rise so far from 2000 up to 2020, it seems as though we're not in any particular one, but we're matching or tracking. Tracking is still not the right word, I have to say. That's why they use the term bounding. We're in the range of, I suppose is another way of putting it, but they choose this wonderful word bounding to say that we're pretty much in the intermediate low at the moment, or at least have done between 2000 and 2020. It doesn't necessarily mean anything much going forward. Just make that quite clear. Then the other thing that it does is it also projects out to 2150. 2150, is that a better way of saying it? Yeah, so it adds a lot more of the timeline than we've seen in the past. So, all right, just remember that we seem to be bounding in the intermediate low, at least for the last 20 years, whatever, in that kind of time frame, not necessarily going forward. We can't use that as an accurate representation going forward. That was obvious. So the other thing that it did was it talked about the frequency of flood events. So nice table here. Let's just focus on the Northeast. In 1990, we knew that we were getting some minor, moderate, and major floods and the frequency at which they were occurring. So say, for the sake of argument, let's just go for the middle of the road, the moderate. There was about 0.3 moderate floods per year in that time frame. By 2020, that had more or less doubled, for the sake of argument. And that is kind of across the board, whether it's minor, moderate, or to the lesser extent major. We didn't get that many major storm events. But here's where it gets interesting. Once we project forward and look at 2050, from 2020 to 2050, we can see something like a tenfold increase in the frequency of high tide flooding. So this is going to be a more persistent problem going forward. So I then was going through the report trying to understand, well, what does minor, moderate, and major mean? They define it for us. So this is just for our tide gauge here, just locally at Nantucket. This is what we have. And we know that this is our mean higher high water level. It's in meters. Then we know that above that level, above mean higher high water by another ½ meter, that's when we see minor flooding. This is how it's defined here. And then the levels for moderate and major. This bugged me, so I just put in feet. Just make it life easy for everyone. So
at least on my screen, the is the blue bar with foot conversions, is that the final bar, or is there anything underneath that?
There's nothing underneath that.
Okay, thank you.
So I just put in foot conversions just for everyone's benefit. Can people see it? There was one that's not a foot conversion. This one here is millimeters to inches. So there is a foot conversion of 0.012, but in reality, that's 0.15 inches. That's another tiny change in this update. We used to say it was 0.14 inches. So sea level rise has very moderately increased. So the 3.8 millimeters per year is a little bit new. It used to be about 3.5. Excuse me. Okay, so we now know what NOAA defines a minor, moderate, and major flood at, and we also have it in terms of feet above mean higher high water. That's nice to know. That's something we didn't necessarily have much of in the past. Okay, so here's what everyone's most interested in. What does the new 2020 information look like? So it's presented in 20-year intervals, and it accepts that there's 4.3 feet of sea level rise since 2000. That's just across the board. So they now are looking at 2020 as not necessarily a new base year. 2000 is still the base year, but they've accepted across the board that now we've got this much, so every scenario moves from there forward. The table doesn't have a lower extreme scenario anymore, but the graphs still contain a low scenario. It goes in 20-year intervals, not 10-year intervals. It doesn't yet include out to 2100 and 2150. I'm still trying to find a good way to say that, so it doesn't sound grating. And it doesn't guarantee that the median bounding and interlow is the correct scenario to track. Just the most likely one, as we know enough about CO2, because we don't know enough about CO2 emissions and the scenario we're actually in. We're still trying to work that out. So you might remember that in February, I talked about the various CO2 scenarios at the February 8th meeting. I have that and can show it on screen if people need it. So that's just something to bear in mind, that we still are not sure which one we're in. So I wanted to put that next to the 2017 information. The tables aren't set up the same way. That bugged me. It looked awkward. So I just reorganized this table, which is taken straight from the town's, from the CRAC's recommendation to the select board. And I just reorganized it. It's the same information presented so that it's comparable with the new 2022 information. So we now know that there is no extreme scenario anymore. We now know we can look at high and compare the previous high of 9.25 down to the new high of 6.6 feet. I always think that people prefer graphs than tables. Tables are impenetrable sometimes. They're just tough to look at. So here's, sorry, I nearly skipped a piece. I beg your pardon. There's no official confirmation in the text, but it seems to be part of the reason why we are bounding in this interlow scenario. And this tracks true for when we look at Boston and where the other high gauges are in Rhode Island and places like that, and the one in Battery Park in New York. Okay, so here's the graph from 2017. I've shown this on screen many times, and I've added the feet along the outside just to make it easier for people to understand. Then let's just go look at the new 2022 version of this. So the 2022 version has feet on this side, but I just wanted to put in the numbers on the right-hand side just so people more clearly can read what it says and what it means. It's still showing something akin to exponential sea level rise for the higher scenarios, and tracking what we might generously call above average for the interlow and low scenarios. It's still showing substantial sea level rise over time, but this represents a terrific refinement of the numbers. It's about the simplest way I can put it. We knew at one point in 2017 in that report that we had one expected set of scenarios. We've moved on, we've refined it, and this is what they're now saying is the most likely scenarios. This is just what you get as graphs, as technology improves and as understanding of sea level rise improves. This might continue to be the case. We might see another refinement like this in another 5 to 10 years. This represents some of the newest and best information we have out there, comparable to the 2017 report that this committee has already used. And now this is the newest and slickest data. That's about the easiest way I can put it. Just for people's benefit, I also have ready to look at them if people wish to see them. The February 8th presentation, where I talked about the MCFRM versus the 2017 information before this came out. Felt a bit weird that this came out shortly after I made a presentation about the old information, but such is life. And I also have the recommendation that was accepted at select board in August 2020. I can leave it there, Mary.
Yeah, so thank you, Vince. So a couple of points that I wanted to make is when we had the presentation on February 8th, we saw that the Massachusetts data was not predicting as an extreme possibility as the 2017 NOAA data. And so I feel grateful that the 2022 NOAA data is sort of in line with the Massachusetts data. It's not as extreme on the high end. So that I thought was good to, as Vince said, to have refined data, and it has, at least in an unsophisticated sense, a corroboration from the Massachusetts data. The other thing I wanted to bring back to everybody's attention was that when we made our recommendation to use the high scenario, it was because we were including an allowance for the storm surge and other effects on top of just sea level rise. So our original recommendation was using the information we had available, which was only NOAA's information about sea level rise, what was the best recommendation for the town, and that was to use the high version from NOAA to give us a little wiggle room for the other effects that are included in the Massachusetts data. or in the Massachusetts projections, I should say. So with those two bits of information, as Vince said, he has some of that available if anybody wants to look at it on the screen for comparison. Comments or questions about Vince's presentation? I'll say thank you, Vince, for doing all of that work, especially for wading through the reports for us. Any comments or questions? Jen?
Thanks, Mary. And mine's kind of along the same lines. It's just really helpful to see all the new data laid out and interpreted, Vince. I appreciate that. And how we really are lining up with, because that's been the interesting thing so far. All the old data was, the first change point was 2020, so now we can really corroborate that and see where we lie in the line of sea level rise. So it's just really, I love seeing all the data together like this. So thanks for pulling it for us.
Yeah, I have to say the hardest thing for me in the NOAA report was getting my head around bounding. And then one of the things that I tried to do, but didn't, have to say, was to see how the NOAA projections for the daily high tide flooding matched up with Chuck Larson's report. I didn't get a good chance to do that yet, but it's on my hit list of ideas for things to do.
Yes, Ian?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Vince. And I haven't waded through all of it either. In fact, I barely dipped my toe in it, to be honest. But are we discussing which scenario to use? Because I would still like us to go with the highest projection possible, because I think most of us have been watching this long enough to know how many uncertainties there still are. And in fact, in the executive summary, key message 3, they refer to that. And so I don't feel that we should be complacent in any way about accepting that this is the last word on the subject.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, so just to keep everybody on the same page, the next item on our agenda is continuing our discussion about updating our recommendation to the select board on sea level rise. And I'm fine if those two discussions bleed into each other, excuse me. But the current item is just the reports themselves. So any comments or questions on the reports and the information that Vince has provided? And if not, we can continue to reference those in our discussion about changing our recommendation to the select board.
Well, I apologize for jumping in before high tide.
not to worry, Ian. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. So the previous numbers were, I mean, 2,100. We were looking at 9 feet, I think, if I'm correct. And yeah, so I don't know if this is a thing at all, but the ever persistent naysayers who get a hold of the data are going to go, see, it's not so bad. We don't have to do all this. We're dropping down to the ominous number of 666 for 2,100. And I mean, I don't know how people are going to, I don't know. And then the 666 could go up again. So anyway, I'm not a scientist, I'm the observer. So, but that's a big drop. And I know that the Remain survey revealed that a lot of the population is alarmed, and a lot of the population is solidly behind what town government does to solve this. But still, numbers. A lot of people know numbers, and oh well, it went down. I don't know. Just an observation.
Thank you, Peter. Vince?
Yep, Peter's dead right. I had the same reaction. Numbers went down, except I didn't say, oh, well, I told you so. I went, yay. I was delighted to see those numbers go down just a little bit. But we're still, and I have to say, Ian's dead right. Using the high scenario still in this as the kind of worst possible for planning purposes still makes a lot of sense. But there's the other thing that caught me in this report, accepting that there's 0.43 feet of sea level rise since 2000. just under half a foot sea level rise in 20 years, that's still a lot. And that's still a worrying thing. But what this report does is it puts a number to it. It helps us understand where we might be bounding and trying to see where we're going. But for planning purposes, if the committee was to choose to continue with NOAA or add MCFM to NOAA or whatever it might be, I'd still be inclined to use the high scenario here. But that's just my feeling at this point.
Jen?
Thanks, Mary. I take, Peter, your point very well, because isn't this the issue with how we communicate science to the public, and it's all really in messaging. And so I would just kind of put forward that I think it's great to see the new data. I think it would be really neat to find a way to talk about how the new data, what it means for what the old data was, how we have learned more and been able to tighten up these projections and have even more confidence in these projections now that we have that past data to look at. But we should think about that as far as how we're communicating this with the public when, and I don't think it's, when we do add it to our recommendations, but I think this would be one of those pieces that, what's our role as education to the community. And this would be something to kind of add to that agenda of how we talk about the new data that we have and be transparent about it, because you don't want to hide it and keep going with 9 feet when really now we have different tightened up projections. But yeah, I think we should think about how we talk about that to the public.
Yeah, I agree, Jen. It's not going to be just as simple as replacing a word or two in our previous recommendation. I think it's going to have to be written in a different way to demonstrate, how we're changing it, what we've learned, that there's more data available, that it's been refined, and so on. Sarah, comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Before Mary spoke, I was going to jump on what Jen said was actually that we didn't have to change our recommendation too much, because in the recommendation, we say that kind of keep following back for new updates. And I don't have the language right in front of me that we used, but this is totally in line with what we said, right? We said we're going to use the NOAA projections, and then they've been updated. So then we can, okay, great. Here are the new updated numbers, basically. I don't think, obviously we'll have to bring it forth to the select board and have them vote on it again because the actual numbers are different. Sorry, but I think that's, as everyone's saying, it's a positive in a way, because it's not the worst case scenario that we've anticipated, but continuing to use the high scenario for exactly all the reasons we posted before, right? So that it's for planning purposes, etc. I know Vince did a deep dive into all the data, but I'd like to see the projections together on a table. So what we had said before and what our new recommendations will be, because there were some different language used in the report of high and extreme. And I just want to make sure that we are using the same category of yeah. And then the other question I had, maybe this is a next step, is how we're going to include the flood data that we've also seen, because I think that's really important information to look at.
Thank you, Sarah. Vince, if you want to scroll back up for a moment, silly me, I hadn't looked at this specifically, but I think that paragraph in bold is probably not going to change. It's still current. If the committee feels that the NOAA high scenario is still the best data available for us to use, then that paragraph doesn't change a whole lot. The table that the paragraph refers to will change because it's been updated, as Sarah pointed out. I do still think that we're going to have to rewrite perhaps the rest of it about the supporting information and Nantucket specific scenarios, because we have more information. We have the Massachusetts data, we have the Coastal Resilience Plan. We have learned a lot in the last 3 years, and I think we should communicate that to the public. And we may need to communicate more about how the public can access the information, because there is more information available, and we've learned more about how it could be used. But good point, Sarah, that that first paragraph still stands pretty strongly. Other thoughts? Sarah?
Sorry, this is just a quick follow-up. I just want to be sure, because I don't have I didn't open the report this morning. Is what we are calling the NOAA high scenario the same as the report that just came out? Are they still calling it the high scenario? Like in the gradation of the different
Right.
types of scenarios. Thank you. Like, is their definition of and what our definition is the same?
Vince, can you put that back up on the screen? Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the answer is yes, but Vince.
I think so too, but I just thought we should double check because I know there was some like extreme, and then there was, and I just want to make sure our like the 2017 is the same as the 2022.
So 2022 on top and the 2017 here. So they both contain a high, and I actually just didn't check. I just assumed that inter-low, intermediate, inter-high, and high were all the same. I got to check that out. You're right, Sarah, and make sure there isn't a change in definition. But in terms of change in projection, all these numbers changed. The only one that didn't was the 4.3.
The 0.43.
Sorry, a big thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Ian?
Thank you, Mary. So one of the reasons why I really feel we need to qualify this is that the reason why I've put my I've gone to my real background is that I have this little, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a UN card from the 7th of September, 2007, when I was present along with God knows how many hundreds of others for the fourth Ipcc report before the UN. So that's what, 15 years ago, right? And I just double checked the figures, and then 15 years ago, they said that a 95% certainty that the sea level rise by 2100 would be between 0.52 meters to a high of 0.98 meters. And so my long-winded point being that we have no idea what, with everything that, especially in key message number 3 in the executive summary, which qualifies, how much can change. And I think taking Peter's point that we really need to be careful how we phrase this so that we make it clear how much uncertainty there still is going forward. Thank you for indulging me.
No, I think point well taken. Yeah. Peter?
And I'm just going to jump right off of what Ian said. We should never lower the urgency in our message, and we should say that somehow that the extreme is going to fluctuate. Now it's down, then it's going to be up. We don't know how much more the Gulf Stream is going to slow down to warm up our waters. We don't know which ice shelf is going to break off. We don't know the factors, how all the factors are going to come together to make things worse or maybe a little bit better. But people, they can't see us lose our urgency. They can't see us leaning back. Oh, that was close. Oh, it's going to be okay. We still have to be on high alert, and we have to project that.
Thank you, Peter. Further comments or questions? Vince, do you feel like we have enough feedback to do a draft update to the recommendation that we can bring back to the committee for further review?
Yes, I think we do.
Okay.
So the focus is going to be the 2022 updated information. My simple question is, are we going to add MCFRM in some format into the new report?
Put the current recommendation back on the screen, Vince. I think that we probably will, because in our current recommendation, we did refer to other information, and the Massachusetts information is more local. And we should say that it's not available publicly yet, but we're looking for that. So if you scroll down past that, keep going. So we talked about storm frequency and storm surge. Is that where we have it? Sorry, I keep going. No, okay, that's it. I think we should add something about the state's efforts in this section. Yeah, so we might replace the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reference with the MCRFM reference.
Works for me.
Further direction from the committee on how this recommendation should be updated. And I'm just, also please feel free to provide your thoughts to Vince in an email, as you get a chance to digest this. I don't think we'll plan on coming back in just 2 weeks with this. I think we'll take a little bit more time.
Can I make a minor suggestion? This needs updating, that's undoubted. We know that the committee is going to expand by 2 members in July. Is this something we'd like the new membership included in the vote on? So I'm not trying to put it off until July, I'm not. I'm just offering the idea that more heads would be beneficial. I'm
not going to commit one way or the other. I mean, the members of this committee have been here for 3 years for the most part. And I'm certainly, open to input from other sources on this. But I don't want to say that, yes, we absolutely have to wait till July, or no, we're not going to wait till July. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Anything further on this subject, the discussion of updating our recommendation? All right, Vince and I will bring that back with a draft and we'll take it from there. Next item on our agenda is public comment. Are there members of the public present who wish to offer a comment on anything either on the agenda or not on the agenda? You can go ahead and use the raise hand feature or just unmute. If there are none, the next item would be the approval of the minutes from April 14th. Vince, if you can put those up on the screen.
Sorry, I wasn't ready for that. This might take a second.
And April 14th was the presentation by the consultants that were engaged by the trustees of reservations and the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, which we attended.
The only thing I got to say about this is that Peter's minutes, I don't even have to add the link to anymore. I have no changes.
So thank you to Peter, not only for these minutes, but for filling in for the balance of our fiscal year on the minutes. We appreciate that very much. Any comments or changes to these minutes? If there are none, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll take that as Joanna seconding. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
I abstain as I wasn't present.
Thank you, Ian. Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Joanna Roach.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Those are adopted. New business reports from the Natural Resources Department or from any of our constituent committees. Vince, anything new going on? Or anything old with an update?
Sorry, I had something in my mind and then I've just lost it. I beg your pardon. I don't at this time.
Anything from committee members? No, okay. So upcoming meeting dates and topics. Our next meeting is May 24th. And we are still waiting to hear about the potential for continued remote meetings. I haven't heard anything about extending past July, but we'll see what happens. Any suggestions for future meeting topics? Always welcome to get those. Vince?
Sorry, my bad. I remembered what it was now. And it does still fit with what you're talking about. The next meeting on the 25th, I think it is. 24th. I'm hoping to have Arcadis present to discuss the CZM application, and I'm going to be looking for feedback. from committee members. So that's going to be one of the things that I'm hoping to have on that agenda, if that's acceptable. We're far from finished, far from it, so that if any committee members have anything on the CZM information I presented last meeting, this time 2 weeks ago, please send it.
Yeah. Okay, if there is nothing else, we can take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Joanna. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sarah. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, everyone. No worries, pleasure. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.